I'm from country New South Wales, down the far south coast near Eden. I went to a place called Bega. I was in the countryside, a country boy, went to Sydney University, taught for a couple of years, then I went to London to do postgraduate work. Then when I came back, I went to the University of Tasmania for 4 years and taught English literature then, and began editing a journal called Australian Literary Studies, which got me into Australian literature. And then I moved to the University of Queensland in Brisbane. My wife was from Townsville. Queensland always wanted to come back to warmer climes, so we came back. And I continued to edit the journal, and I got more and more interested in Australian literature. And my association with Xavier Herbert, which was begun in Hobart, was continued, and I got to meet him eventually. I was editing the journal, as I mentioned, and I was teaching Capricornia, and there was an introduction by Doug Stewart, if I remember rightly, and he talked about an Adelaide festival when Xavier had given a talk on Capricornia and his career. It was way back in time, and it sounded a very interesting talk. And I didn't think it was published. So I plucked up my courage and wrote, "Dear Mr. Herbert." And he wrote back very charming letters and said, yes, you can go ahead and publish it. And after that, he used to write to me at odd times, and so he was very much the charmer. I think with hindsight, he was getting me in. He sensed someone who might be of use to him and help to him. And he wrote these quite amusing letters. A couple of them were addressed by his wife, from his wife, and he said that it wasn't really his wife, it was him using her as a go-between. Anyhow, when I got to Brisbane, first year I was here, there was a conference at James Cook University of Townsville. First ever conference on Australian literature, I think rightly, would have been about 1971. And I went up to that, and Xavier said, well, here's an opportunity for you to come on to Cairns and we can meet. And I thought, wow, that's really a tremendous opportunity. So I went to the conference, which was organised by Colin Roderick, and then travelled up with my wife, with a friend of Xavier's. Typically, it shows how odd he was, he said he'd arrange a lift with his dentist, and he said that his dentist could tell me a bit about him. And I mean, the dentist didn't know much about Xavier or didn't understand his work as a writer, but it was Xavier's idea that you need an intermediary to get through to the great man. You just didn't approach him directly. It was rather odd, it was rather fun in a way. And we stayed at the pub 3 doors up from where Xavier lived at Red Lynch, called the Red Beret, I think. And I saw a lot of him. And I remember meeting him mainly on the back lawn. He had a little cottage, 2-bedroom wooden house opposite the railway station, reminiscent of his father. He used to be an engine driver in Western Australia. And Xavier used to often go over and talk to the engine drivers. Anyhow, I met him on the lawn and he was in his shorts, looking very fit. He must have been in his mid-60s, hair on his chest, athletic, just thongs, and he proceeded to watch, he let me watch, he was very into physical, he was physically fit, and he did a lot of exercises, and he got me to watch him as he went through them all, very proud of his muscles and what he could do. And that sort of eased things in, that was jocular enough and friendly enough. And I remember there was a loo down the back at the end of the lawn, just under the palm trees. And I went in there, lifted the lid, and I was confronted by a sheet of rubber. And I thought, this is odd. And I looked at the wall and it said, "Please replace frog baffle after use." I thought that was odd too. But I worked out there was a little string attached to the end of this piece of rubber, and you hung it on the hook. So I took it off and hung it there, and I realised that it was to keep the frogs out of the bowl. It was a little device Xavier had invented. He was fond of inventing little things and doing little things like that, and he'd thought this up to deal with the frogs in North Queensland, the frog baffle, which has all amused me very much. Anyhow, he took me out into the cane fields. He was just on the edge of cane fields at Red Lynch, and we went driving, and he took me to the place where he used to often go and write notes for his novel that he was halfway through, Poor Fellow, My Country. And there was a little clutch of mango trees in the middle of the cane field and a horse, again reminiscent of Xavier's father, who was a great horseman. Xavier wasn't. And it was shady, and it was nice atmosphere there, and he had his camp stools. He owned a Jeep that he was very proud of, so we pulled up our camp stools, and he proceeded to tell me the beginning of Poor Fellow, My Country, when a little boy called Prindy sings up the fish from the pool of water. And I was entranced, enraptured by the oral telling. He didn't have any notes or anything, it was all in him. It just came out of him. His empathy was with the little boy and with Aboriginal magic and with the scene setting and so on. And I've never forgotten it. It was extremely memorable. And as I was sitting there, a little green spider started dancing along my arm, and involuntarily I smacked it and killed it. And Xavier, who could be a very gentle man as well as a very angry man, a very vindictive man, although not to me, luckily enough, he had a very gentle voice, and his voice dropped right down. He said something like, "That was murderous, you know." And I thought, oh my God, I've done the wrong thing, we're out forever now. But it was just it showed a gentleness in him. It wasn't really a reprimand, it was just something he felt. And then we packed up, and he took me down to where he did his running. His running was very important in the writing of his novel. He used to set stones and mark out a distance and do so many laps. And he said that this sort of exercise got the adrenaline going, and towards the end of his run, he started to get images and ideas and a sense of how his novel might go. So it wasn't just physical jerks like his physical exercise, where it was all built into a program for getting the novel written, and also for trying to draw in his unconscious, I think, this sort of half awake state or exhausted state when things drift in that mightn't ordinarily drift in. That was quite important to him, I think. And he does speak in letters about how part of the Poor Fellow, My Country, a lot of it he felt just bubbled up from his unconscious. And that's the best part. When Xavier gets on the bandwagon and thumps the drum, well, he can be pretty boring, coarse, browbeating. It's part of the mixture he was, which I'm trying to convey in little ways. He was a very complex man, a great mixture. He would often get out of bed very early, about 3 a.m. or 4 a.m, before it was dawn, and he would reach for his notebook and pencil and note down his dreams. And that was another way of tapping his unconscious, of getting ideas that had floated up during the night. So that was a very important time for him to start. And sometimes he wrote letters, including to me and others. He called them pipe openers, getting going. That was probably in the later in the day before he wrote. He lived, he slept and worked in a shed in his backyard. He joked and said he lived in the shed in the backyard of his wife's house. That was one of his jokes. And he in fact did. He used to go inside for meals and talk for Sadie, but he spent a lot of time in that shed and on outings such as the one I've described. And in that shed there was a safe, fireproof safe from an old Kookaburra stove. And as he finished his novel, he'd get it copied and keep a copy in there to have near him. But he'd have breakfast, then he'd go out to his place at the cane fields and do his run, do his exercises, and he would do a lot of writing in the shed.
Laurie, can you describe how your relationship developed along with Poor Fellow My Country? Because you played a significant role in the development of Poor Fellow My Country.
Well, there's a lot of hindsight in this. He knew I admired his work, especially Capricornia, very much. And although Xavier used to ridicule academics, ACOs as he called them, Xavier had a way of making his way in the world. He knew that academics could be useful if he could get on the right side of them and if they could write approvingly of his work. So I think, looking back, he cultivated me. I was just so amazed to be in touch with a person I regarded as a great writer. This didn't occur to me. I thought he was tremendously generous and understanding, as he was. But he also had an eye to his ambitions as a writer in cultivating me even though I was not a very noteworthy academic at the time. He and Sadie sort of looked me over when I went up to Redledge. Not obviously or consciously, but he told me later that they were trying to gauge what I was like. And he quoted Sadie's verdict, "There is no harm in him." And, well, actually, that was pretty true. I was quite admiring of Xavier and Sadie, and only wanted to stand and admire and to rather in awe of him. I was rather in awe of him for a long time, and so thrilled that I could meet such an outstanding writer in this intimate way. But from his point of view, as I say, he checked me out. He didn't want an academic who was going to be intrusive and interventional and someone he didn't like, someone who might run him down, appear admiring, but behind his back running down, so forth. So that was part of the frame.
You also played a role in almost becoming his, you were required to read every chapter by chapter, and he needed your approval almost to proceed, although you said he wasn't looking for someone to edit his work.
No.
Would you like to just talk about that?
Sure. He called me his mentor and various other flattering things, but after that first trip we kept corresponding. Then he said, "I'd like you to come up and read the novel as far as I've written it and tell me what you think of it." So I went up for about 10 days, I think, and it took me about a week reading from the typescript copy on his front veranda, and I was bowled over by it and thought it was absolutely wonderful. And I told him so quite straightforwardly and quite truthful, and he liked that. And what I thought he was looking for was moral support from someone who had a position, who knew something about literature, and who could help him along. Because when he began Poor Fellow My Country, he must have been in his early 60s. You could check on this, 65. He was 75 when he finished it. He was an old man, and it was a very strict regimen. It was a huge novel, and to finish it was a tremendous struggle. And he wanted some outsider to, as I say, give him moral support. He told me of an interesting story about Sadie. He used to ask her opinion, But Sadie was very canny. She knew that if she said the wrong thing, he'd jump on her and bully her. He was a very gentle man, but he was also a bully. So naturally in his novel, he inveighs against bullies, the imperialists coming to Australia and so forth, and he sympathises with the people who are bullied. For both parts of Xavier Herbert, of course. So that Sadie would pay more attention, as it were, to the great work, the magnum opus, as he used to call it, he bought her a special chair, a second-hand dentist's chair. I mean, it's another, the typical of Xavier. He had these wings, a very whimsical, strange, entertaining man. Who would think of doing that? He thought she'd be comfortable in that. And of course he was right. And she was so comfortable she'd go to sleep. And he'd get irate and angry, and he'd wake her up and say, "You weren't listening." And she'd say very gently, she's a very canny Jewish lady, "Oh yes, I was." He said, "Well, what did I say?" And she'd find a way of getting around that. But she wasn't going to sit there and be read to for hours by this husband of hers, gifted as he was. She admired him tremendously. But she's very independent, and she didn't want to get browbeaten or overawed or just used by him. So she had a way of insulating herself while remaining close to him. And I think she was, in fact, his main inspiration. I was a mentor, if you like. I'll talk about it more in a minute. But she was an inspiration. She is someone he lived with for years, and he knew, you can feel this, that she admired him, and she felt she had a great treasure in this man who would produce something wonderful one day. But to get back to the mentorship, when I read the novel, then he suggested that he send me bits of chapters as he finished them and get my opinion. And he didn't want my literary approval or any editing from me. What he wanted was to hear that what he was doing was good. And I had no trouble. I mean, there are a few reservations. It's a very uneven novel. But I had no trouble in saying what I admired, quite sincerely, and I stuck to that. And that's what he wanted to hear, and I might make some comments. But I don't think he was really guided by me. I was a sounding board in a way for his own ideas and the directions he was taking. And it relieved this tremendous loneliness. He was an isolate. Psychologically, he was an isolate. He didn't get on with people very well. He was strange. He was a bit mad, frankly, but he was also wonderfully gifted, that combination, which is not uncommon. And I think it relieved that sense of being completely alone on the sidelines, which he treasured in a way. He liked to be on the sidelines. He liked to be alone. But he also liked some feedback, some companionship, and he could be very amusing. He told me wonderful tales, made me laugh, and he courted me in a way, my approval. He got me to like him, and it wasn't hard.
Mm. One of the things you commented on in your last article, Laurie, was the architecture of Poor Fellow My Country that had, you said, I think, would you like to just explain what that you mean by that? And
yes. Well, it's a huge, sprawling novel, as you would know, as people pointed out when it was published, as thick as a telephone book and a door stopper, etc., etc. But right from the beginning, which I'll talk about, he had a sense of direction, even though he could change direction and have second thoughts, and he had a sense of building it up into an epic. And the recurrence of characters and the way he fitted incidents together and kept in mind a vision. It is a visionary novel. It is inspired. And I responded to that. And I called it the edifice, which I later thought was a bit weak to call it an edifice, but I meant a grand, imposing building. But he liked it. And he liked my appreciation that he was building it up so carefully, even though he wanders at times, and as I say, it's an uneven novel, There's an overall structure to it, a control without being over-controlling, which prevented from being just a splurge, a sprawl, a rolling out. Even though he could write, he could roll things out in the sense, I think he must have had ecstatic moments when he wrote some lovely parts about the countryside, about the Aborigines, but he didn't get altogether carried away. He kept the design. He had a grand design, and he was a designer, and he kept it in mind, even though he went on too long and strung it out a bit.
That's something else you mentioned, that excess was actually part of his approach to art, almost. Yeah.
Well, Xavier was, as I say, a complex man. If he did things, he had an inclination to go overboard, to go in boots and all. And this was his last novel and his last statement to fellow Australians. I mean, it is a patriotic novel, it is a visionary novel, and he wanted to express at last a culmination of a lifetime of being an Australian, seeing the countryside despoiled and ruined, seeing the Aborigines treated so badly, and he wanted to mount a kind of Jeremiah, a kind of last testament, what I really feel about this place, what were my hopes for it, how they have been blighted and the terrible things that have happened. There was that, and this involved a lot of passion. He's a very passionate man. As I mentioned, he could be vindictive, he could be very touchy, but apart from that, his feelings were involved in the novel, and his feeling for the countryside particularly, and for Aborigines and for their plight, and for certain white people who tried to help them. He had an empathy which could at times amount to great passionate empathy. He just didn't feel for them. He went in a very powerful way.
Laurie, you edited his letters, or you edited a group of his selected letters. What did he wrote? As you mentioned, you wrote a lot of letters. What did you? Do you want to make any comment about your experience of doing that?
Yes, I would. The novel began with letters to his wife, Sadie. He was a relieving chemist up the coast near, about 50 miles from Brisbane. And he started making jottings and sending notes to Sadie about this tremendous novel that was brewing. And the letters are in the Friar Library. And even the first few letters, they mention the wonderful title, Poor Fellow, My Country. It is a great title. I made a mistake once of calling it Poor Fellow, My Country, and nearly bit my tongue off because he said, oh, Laurie, it's not fellow, it's fellow. Because he wanted to keep the dignity of it, the high plane on which it operated. Sorry, I've lost the thread.
We're talking about his letters.
Oh yes, sorry, his letters.
And the book you edited.
Well, when he sent his chapters or parts of chapters, I used to write back my letters, my thoughts, and he used to write me long letters. As a friend, as we developed, and as a writer. He would unburden himself. And also, as I said, I can't think of a better word than courting, cultivate. He was cultivating me. And he was trying to make himself interesting, amusing, fascinating, and he certainly succeeded through the power of the pen. I thought his letters were most entertaining, most vivid. I could hop from here to there and get back to the serious part of the story, and that did help to get me in and to keep me fascinated. And after our association was over, I thought it would be a great idea for people who like Poor Fellow, My Country to read something of Xavier to get a sense of the man behind the novel. This strange, complex, mad, inspired genius that he was. So I thought of editing the novels, and his biographer, friend de Grain, agreed to edit them with me. By the way, I mentioned genius. He had a row with Beatrice Davis, who had been his editor for Soldiers' Women at Angus and Robertson, probably the most famous literary editor in Australia. And she helped him a lot with that novel. And I think he dedicated it to, or was going to dedicate it to, my beloved patroness. Shades of the Mentor, echoes of the Mentor a bit. Anyhow, they fell out. And he asserted, in the face of perhaps some critical remarks, because she did criticise him, I didn't, that he was a genius. And she said, well, you might be a genius, but you're a mug genius. And I think she was trying to get at this disparity in Xavier between this zany man and this very insightful, creative mind. And he pounced on that, mug genius, and he never let him forget it. And he became extremely vindictive towards it. It's all in the letters. And he wouldn't go to gatherings in Sydney when he was in Sydney for the publication of the novel because she'd be there, and he persecuted her. This is a debit side of Herbert. He really persecuted the poor woman. Anyhow, get back to the letters. I think they're very funny letters. They're entertaining. They're serious. They describe his feelings, his life, his background. The way he lived up at Red Lynch, where he was born at Geraldton, his life as a pharmacist. And yes, I think he's one of our better letter writers. I think next to Miles Franklin, he would be my favourite Australian literary letter writer.
Thank you, Laurie. One thing I think I wanted to ask you was your comments. Do you want to comment about his search for personal authenticity, if you like, as a writer? You know, his need to become a writer, and along the way feeling that he wasn't any good, you know, as a writer at different periods, particularly after Capricornia couldn't get published, and you did an article, for instance, on his road trip to Darwin, but also his almost linked to Australia and its identity, its role to the self. Yes. They're almost intertwined, aren't they? Would you like to comment on that?
Yes. Well, Xavier's own psychological problems, which sounds a bit of a cliche, but his own dividedness between being an outsider and feeling that his own self-devaluation as against his rather boastful, overweening pride, this clash began early in his family. Or so he says. His mother put him on the outer of the family, and he didn't get close to his father, so he felt on the outer, and he felt inferior. And when he did venture to use words as something to show them that he really had something in them, according to him, his mother was dismissive. So his becoming a writer was a kind of assertion, a kind of proving that there was something wonderful and valuable in him, and that he had something to say, no matter what the mockers or other people might thought. And also it links up with his identification with the Aborigines, the outsiders, the people on the sidelines who were badly treated. He could identify with them, not altogether, it's a very tangled sort of relationship, but not in a condescending way. At his best, he wanted to be an Aborigine because he admired them. He admired certain aspects of them. And he had a dream once where he dreamt in the way that an Aborigine might dream. And he thought this was a great breakthrough because he had succeeded in closing a gap between himself and these foreign outside people. He could get to understand them and to love them. And in that way, not to be too pretentious, he was getting to express his own love for himself, for the world of Australia, for the Aborigines, and at the same time transcend all the lack of confidence he had, because he could be overweeningly brash and confident, but lurking behind that was a sense that, well, perhaps he wasn't all that great. That's not uncommon. But with Xavier, things were magnified. He dramatised them. He was a great dramatiser. He put things through a magnifying glass and they would come up larger than life, to coin a phrase. Well, I'm not the sort of person who can speak with any finality on Xavier Herbert's place, except to give my feelings that in his time he was very influential, and the people have subsequently discovered Capricornia many years after and realised how ahead of its time it was in its sympathetic treatment of Aborigines in the top end, and in the rather ruthless, savage life up there, rather primitive life in the early 20th century. It stands, and I've known people discover it. Well, poor fellow, my country. It's a big challenge for readers, and a lot of people won't rise to it. But it is part of our legacy, I feel. It will stand for some people. As Randolph Stowe, whom I keep coming back to, said, it is a classic. Well, we all know that some works are classics in inverted commas, but they're not read. And we can say, oh, well, it's a classic. But Xavier Herbert will be read by what Joseph Furphy called the discerning reader. It's much greater than Joseph Furphy, who used to be in the pantheon of Australian writers, and still is, but in my opinion, is not nearly up there with Herbert. Well, he wrote of a different time, and he left the Aborigines completely out of the picture, and he wrote of the relatively settled part down in the Riverina. But to come back to the question, Xavier Herbert is too vivid a writer, too impassioned, too involved, not to find admirers. They may not be numerous, but they will be there, and a sense of discovery will await them.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you very much.
That's right.
Okay. I think we might, if you don't mind, I might ask you the question again about the film Australia, just in case we lost that one. Would you be okay about going over that again?
Yes, we'll end with
Yeah, okay. You wrote a brilliant article, I think, capturing in a really succinct way the comparison, if you like, between the movie Australia, Baz Luhrmann's movie Australia, and Poor Fellow Country. Could you comment about the fact that they didn't seem to acknowledge Herbert as a source, except making references to him, but also what you thought of the way he used Herbert's ideas, if you like?
Just a few comments, because I wrote a note, really. There are echoes of Capricornia and Poor Fellow My Country in the film. Just echoes. I don't think they used it as a source, but bits of the novels waft through the film. For instance, the young Aboriginal boy who goes with his uncle at the end to find his country is, I'm sure, partly modelled on Prindy, the golden boy of Poor Fellow My Country, who wants to discover his heritage, and who is quite a moving person who goes on a search, and it isn't easy. And his heritage turns out to be rather a bitter one. It's not a sugary one, as in the film, A Happy Ever After. And in the film, there's a rather embarrassing attempt to gesture, and it is only a gesture, towards the Aboriginal dream time and what it means. They sing over Somewhere Over the Rainbow with an American audience in mind, as though that kind of sentimental dreaming has anything to do with Aboriginal Dreamtime and what it means. I mean, it was a very poor, disastrous attempt, and very embarrassing, I found. Whereas in the novel, Xavier Herbert does give you an idea how Aboriginals may well feel. I was reminded of the film and the Dreamtime the other day when I read A Life of Bruce Chatwin, a poor, tragic soul with some gifts as a writer, but a lost soul in a way that Xavier Herbert wasn't lost. And he wrote a book called The Songlines, which was another attempt to empathise with the Aborigines and their feeling for the country and how they knew the country by heart, as it were, and by song, and they put their heart into their songs. And when it came out, there was a razzmatazz, and people thought, oh, he's got it, yes, the song lines. But if you compare it with Poor Fellow My Country, it is very simplified in comparison. As a matter of fact, you could call it simplistic. Xavier Herbert is more complex about the relationship between the Aborigines and the country, and how it is not straightforward, and how it is very varied. A lot of people justly regard Herbert as a bit of a nut, as a skite, as someone who banged the drum and got on the bandwagon. And there are elements of that in him, but there's another side. There was a very tender side to Xavier Herbert, a very, I use the word empathy a lot, ability to feel, to imagine, to get out there into the country and to create, and into Aborigines and to white people as well, and to create it. And this tender, softer side was often submerged in real life because Herbert liked to strut the stage and strut his stuff. And it was good self-advertising. I mean, he was a dream of journalist copy, but it was a strut and it was an act. As I mentioned before, he's a great actor and his works have great dramatic episodes. There's murder and mayhem in Poor Fellow My Country. There's a woman with a wooden leg, and there are crocodiles, and there are sticks and broken heads, and it comes off, but it's so full on. That's it.
My name's Trezise,
Yep.
Matt Trezise. I'm one of the sons of Percy Trezise, and I live here in Laura mainly because I just love it. I love the small town, I love the climate, I love this part of Australia's geography, and I have an endless fascination with the rock art and a friendship with the Aboriginal community here that I really value. I actually first came up here, I grew up in Cairns, but where my parents were living, our family lived, but I came up here in 1960 with my dad Percy and Xavier Herbert and my brother Stephen. Stephen and I were then 7 and 9. Percy and Xavier wanted to come up because some road construction workers had located a major rock art site just south of the Laura township, and Percy and Xavier, already mates through flying and through their interest in literature and art, also shared an interest in Aboriginal culture and in the progress socially and economically of Aboriginal people. So they were both very keen to come up and have a look at the rock art at the place that from that time on was known as Split Rock. So in May 1960 the four of us drove up, Percy and Xavier and these two little boys, and that was my first experience of the bush really and of rock art. And I kept coming back here, and I've lived here on and off for well over 30 years.
And what was your impression of Xavier Herbert when you first met him?
Well, you know, back in the late 50s, Xavier was one of Dad's mates, and of course back in those days, you know, men when they were together doing things didn't take much notice of kids. But I can remember going to visit Xavier and Sadie at their little Queenslander out at Redlynch, and I always loved going there. Xavier was tolerant, but as I said, he didn't have a lot of time for kids. But Sadie, on the other hand, was you know, a wonderful person. We used to really enjoy walking around her beautiful rainforest garden, and because Sadie was really into, you know, the garden and the bush, and you know, and basically we would be doing that while Percy and Xavier were inside the house talking about more weighty matters.
And can you tell us what you do now up here, Matt, what you do here?
Well, our family and a few minor partners have a couple of small grazing properties up here. They're properties that are really no longer viable for grazing, the economics of grazing on the peninsula having changed. But we bought them because of their natural and cultural values. They're properties that are worth conserving just because they're wonderful country, beautiful streams, beautiful escarpments, wonderful open forests, and of course rock art sites. Like the Aboriginal land in this area and like all the major cattle stations in this area, there are sandstone shelters with wonderful rock art right through this region, and our properties are the same. So we've got these two small properties, but as I say, grazing's not really viable, and so really there's no way for me to make a living out of those properties. So plus I also have a 10-year-old daughter who needs to attend school, so I rent a cottage here in Laura, and I've got a couple of part-time jobs. I do the Centrelink agency work, so that if people have got forms to submit to Centrelink or other problems they need to resolve with Centrelink, they come and see me. And the other part-time job I have is doing the admin for our little school. We've got a little school, 1.5 teacher school with 12 kids, where my daughter goes to school, my younger daughter goes to school, and my elder daughter works as the teacher aide. and I'm there 3 afternoons a week to help the principal with the administration.
And it's a very small little country town, isn't it? So everybody
Yeah.
knows everybody else's business, that sort of thing.
Laura's got 100 people, approximately, and at least 85 of those are local Aboriginal people. The rest of us are non-Indigenous people who've got businesses in the town mostly, or other jobs. You know, we've got a policeman, a school teacher, a clinic with a very good nurse in charge. Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about the rock art itself in this area. Can you describe it, what it's like?
Yeah. Well, Laura's sandstone country. So it's country that's flat on top and has these vertical escarpments, and as is often the case in sandstone country, the sandstone weathers into these hollows, shallow caves you might call them, which were the best, in fact the only good wet season shelter for Aboriginal people. And so people lived in those sites. We've got sites in this area that go back about 40,000 years, probably older. As more archaeological work is done, they keep pushing back the date of occupation. We're confident that it's at least 50,000 in this area. So Aboriginal people, as hunter-gatherer people did all over the world, started painting in the sandstone shelters. And we've got shelters in this area that were first occupied 39,000 years ago and were still in use when Europeans first arrived here. That was for the Palmer River Gold Rush, 1872, and those same sites were still in use as late as around about the time of the First World War. But
can you describe to people how your father came to discover these sites?
Yeah, well, I should give you some background into why they needed to be rediscovered. The impact of the gold rush and the sudden invasion quite late in Australia's colonial history, the 1870s, was such a massive and destructive impact on the Aboriginal people of the region that much of their population fled to neighbouring areas. The people who remained quite quickly became attached to grazing operations, so the annual cycle of visiting these rock art sites in the wet season and using those places as wet season shelters was all finished by around about 1920. And while stockmen, black and white, were familiar with some sites which they found on horseback, and of course Aboriginal people knew that there were other sites back in the hills, some of which they knew had been refuges used by tribal people who refused to submit to the colonial rule and who were living in remote rock shelters at all times of year in order to evade the much feared black police. Aboriginal troopers brought in from other regions whose task was to subdue the local people. So when the road workers discovered the art down the road here at Split Rock in 1960, Percy and Xavier, when they saw this bright panel, this large painted shelter with this amazing complexity of rock art in it, some art obviously highly skilled, other art quite naive, some very fresh and recent looking, other art obviously very, very old, they concluded it was an inevitable realisation that the art in that site could only be part of a tradition that must exist in the region. And so therefore there had to be a lot of other sites. So back then in 1960, Percy in particular, but with Xavier's encouragement and help and participation some of the time, decided to get in touch with the local Aboriginal people and try to find out more about this rock art, which they were sure existed in the escarpments around this region. And that's what they did.
And your father was a pilot?
He was an airline pilot. That's how he got to know Xavier. He was an airline pilot with ANA. He was flying the old DC-3s, the old Dakotas, out of Cairns to the Gulf communities, to the Cape York Peninsula communities, to the cattle stations, up to Thursday Island or Horn Island Airport, and also across to New Guinea. And Xavier, as a novelist, who, with a very intermittent income, worked at the airport as the groundsman in the hangar. So Xavier could often be seen when us kids would go out to the airport to meet Dad coming in from a flight. Xavier could be seen pushing a broom in the hangar, and so with their common interests in literature and art and Aboriginal people and flying, Percy and Xavier became mates.
Right, and from there, your father did aerial shots, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, he soon, once he established a relationship with Aboriginal people, he realised and did a few exploratory trips. I did some great walks with Dad and people who've passed away now, the late George Pegas and Willie Long, wonderful old men who were born in the late 1880s, so who were very old men in 1960 and in the early 60s, and in fact both passed away in the early 1960s. But they accompanied Dad and I on walks to try to relocate rock art, and of course they were the key to Dad's initial understanding of what the art meant.
Right, so it was passed on.
They were men who'd worked on cattle stations all their adult lives, but they were men who could remember being in rock shelters when they were little boys. But which was during the height of the gold rush. But by the time they were young men working on cattle stations, people weren't regularly visiting the sites anymore. Yeah.
So your father then used aerial shooting to...
Yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting
That's
that.
okay.
Yeah. So Percy used to overfly the region. If he was flying, for instance, from Cairns to Weipa in the DC-3 and later in the Fokker Friendship, he would be passing over this region, and he would often descend to 500 feet or even lower sometimes, and to try and have a good close look at the country and mark what he thought looked like likely locations for rock art on his topographical map. And then when he could get a few days off from flying, he'd make a trip up here, and he'd usually pick up George or Willie, and by that time Dick Ruffsey, who was an Aboriginal man not of this region but another artist, and a very gregarious, in fact charismatic man, who was able to help Dad make friends with these oldest Aboriginal men of the region, who were understandably a bit suspicious and a bit reticent of a white man coming along expressing interest in their culture. But they became Dad's closest friends.
Could you tell the story of how Xavier discovered, I guess, the Quinkan caves and the link between the ABC documentary?
Xavier was the person who rediscovered Quinkans, the site we call Quinkans. It's probably one of the most important cultural sites in the region. It has paintings that we believe are quite sacred, and which we are confident was a site strictly limited to visitation by a particular class of people, almost certainly men only, and almost certainly men with a particular connection to that place. And but it's about 1.5 kilometres from a very large family campsite, what we call a secular campsite, which was the best shelter in the region, a beautiful big shelter, a site that we call Giant Horse because it has a painting in it which is the largest single rock art figure in Australia and one of the largest in the world, a huge painting of a horse, obviously done in the early days of European colonisation. And Percy and Xavier and Dick Ruffsey, and my mum Beverly was along on that trip too, were at Giant Horse to undertake the official recording of the site, both photographic and in sketches, of the site on behalf of the Australian Institute of Aboriginal Studies in Canberra, which they had a small grant from to do this work. And they actually had with them an ABC TV film crew working on a documentary program called A Big Country, which a lot of older Australians will remember. And the Big Country crew and Percy had a lot of work to do in the site. They were filming Percy undertaking his artistic recording of the art of the original art on the wall. And Xavier said, "Well, is there anywhere else around here, Percy, where you think I could go and have a look?" And Percy said, "Yeah, well, I saw some rocks that look promising from the air, and they're over that way, a couple of, a mile or so away." So off Xavier went to explore, and must have been 3 or 4 hours later, I think, and they were still filming when Xavier came bursting through the shrubbery and back into the line of the camera, shouting excitedly, "I've found the most wonderful place." And that was the rediscovery of Quinkan Gallery, which it's a site now that is very strictly controlled by the Aboriginal traditional owners, and only experienced and authorised guides, generally Aboriginal traditional owner guides, take a limited number of people there under very strictly controlled conditions, and it's a wonderful place. I'm sure you'll enjoy seeing it tomorrow.
There are actually lots of these caves around on your site and on other sites, and many other caves that have never been discovered. Is that right?
There are thousands of rock art sites right throughout the sandstone country of central Cape York Peninsula. It's the Laura Normanby Basin. It's basically an ancient Jurassic and later Cretaceous era basin, from a time when this part of Australia was actually under the ocean. As the Australian landmass has gradually drifted north and pushed up against the Asian landmass, and the edge of the continent has curled and lifted up out of the ocean, and so what was an offshore sandy ocean bed has become this vast sandstone plateau, which is eventually solidified into sandstone. So it's 65 to 85 million years old, the sandstones of this area. Most of the sandstone has been weathered away, so we're left with these remnant plateaus that are virtually desert on top. What the Gold Rush era geologist and surveyor Logan Jack described as deeply dissected desert sandstone tablelands. So you've got flat, dry sandstone plateaus sliced up by deep gorges with beautiful streams in the bottom. And the rock shelters at the base of the cliffs were where the Aboriginal people lived. And that's right throughout this part of central Cape York Peninsula, but the same phenomenon occurs right across northern Australia and down into central Australia. Wherever there's old sandstone country, there's rock art. There are thousands of sites in this region, and we do from time to time still locate sites that nobody living was aware of.
So they go back to the dream time.
They certainly do. They go right back to the dream time. But to me, the most encouraging thing, the thing that I'm most pleased about, is that the young generation of Aboriginal people here, people my daughter's generation, are taking a really active and strong interest in it, as did people of my generation when I came to live here 30 odd years ago, and are actively involved in training programs to become rangers and tour guides and to look after the country and look after the art sites.
Excellent. And Xavier kept coming up here even after he'd written Port Fellow, My Country. He visited, came back to this area, so it was very important to him.
Yeah, well, and I don't think Xavier did much writing when he was at home in Redlynch with Sadie. He preferred to go bush, and I know, writing one of his earlier books, he actually went sleeper cutting in the rainforest and lived in a hut in the bush on his own, and wrote by the light of a kerosene lantern, and cut sleepers by day to earn a bit of money. But when he was writing Poor Fellow My Country, he came up here and went up to Kalpower Station, up near Princess Charlotte Bay, where he was good friends with Jack Scott, who was then the manager of Kalpower, and stayed at Kalpower for a couple of months at least, I think. I'm not sure how long, and actually wrote quite a bit of it while he was there. But yeah, he was an occasional companion with Dad and Dick Ruffsey and old Willie and George on some of the rock art trips. And
you remember him in his old Land Rover and coming to your farm?
Yeah, I remember him. I just remember him coming to Jalbinna the once, because we didn't acquire Jalbinna until the mid-70s. And Xavier came out there, and it was about 9 months before he passed away. It wasn't long before he went back out to Central Australia for the last time. And but he came out to Jalbinna and spent a few days with us, and that was really great because he'd mellowed. Yeah. And he and Dad, who occasionally clashed, had reconciled then, and I think that was important to both of them, as Dad's copy of Poor Fellow My Country bears the inscription, "To Percy Trezise, my only male mate." As Xavier always said that he didn't have any friends who were men, his friends were all women. But I think Percy was the one exception to that.
Thank you very much, Matt. Any final comments before we finish that you'd like to say that we haven't covered? Take your time.
Well,
about the land, about this area, about the importance of the rock art to Australia.
Yeah, Australians need to understand how important this rock art is. It is the Australian rock art is the most important archaeological link to the past and a living link to the past in the world. Nowhere else can you find places that were occupied by hunter-gatherer man 30 and 40,000 years before agriculture and the building of towns started anywhere in the world, and those sites were occupied right up until the lifetimes of people who are still alive today. And they are the most extraordinary record of the history of humankind that exists anywhere in the world. And they're basically ignored and neglected. And they really rely for their protection upon the fact that they are in remote locations in the bush that don't have roads and signs leading to them, and to the fact that Aboriginal people understand now and value these places and are determined to protect them.
So what would you like to see happen?
I think the resourcing of cultural heritage management up here, and generally in Australia I believe, has basically been on the basis of a dole replacement type scheme, where people are employed short term on low wages, often just part-time, and provided with a fairly rudimentary level of training. Now fortunately that's changing, but the funding is still not there to really tackle this extraordinary, valuable heritage properly, to ensure that it's understood and protected, and its owners, because Australian legislation recognises the Aboriginal people as the owners of these art sites, no matter what other tenure may apply to the land that they are on. It's essential that we really fund and tackle the issue of the conservation of rock art properly. I wanted to say something else about Xavier. I was an avid reader when I was a kid. From the age of 10, when I was bedridden for several months with a broken leg, I became an obsessive reader. I was constantly reading, and of course my dad being mates with Xavier Herbert, I got hold of every Xavier Herbert book I could find, and from the age of about 11 till I was a teenager, sort of 15 or 16, I read every book of Xavier's that I could lay my hands on, and so he was a real influence on me too, and I think Australians should be reading his books again. Soldiers' Women is a wonderful novel about Sydney and about the war. Seven Emus is a wonderful novel about the pastoral industry and Aboriginal people's role in it. Disturbing Element, that Xavier later said he wished he'd never wrote, was a very revealing book too, about life in Australia, just as much as about Xavier himself.
So I'm one of the traditional owner here, and I'd like to welcome you to Mushroom. This is the crocodile. And you got all avian feet here. And you can see a lot of these have been painted over and over again. People come along here, and everyone who comes here, they paint on it, just to show that they've been here. And you got dilly bag here. Most thing here, you see, you got fishes down there. Another lot up there.
And how long is this, Tom?
This there was carbon tested, it was about 130,000 years old. And there's some ochre was around here, but I don't know where they got to. There was a lot of ochre that you found down, was left around here.
And Thomas, what country is this? Could you explain what the country is?
This is in Queensland, North Queensland.
Yeah, but your country. Yeah.
Oh, it is all colour country.
All colour?
Yep.
Yep. Could you explain what that is, what that means?
No, I couldn't remember.
That's
No.
okay.
That. See, this probably been the first white man they ever seen. They painted him upside down because he might have been dead when they seen him.
Right.
And over here you got a eel. And these are some of the tools they've used here.
What would they use them for, Tom?
So this one here you can see is for grinding, sharpening stuff. This here would have been part of a stone axe. This here is for cutting. It's sharp, both edge. So is this one. When you come closer, you can see down here where they used to grind all the ochre to do paintings here and whatever. Here, there's another one here, and you got this thing here is a yam, and you got little Quinkan here and spirit there, another fella here, and dogs. This be the dog. The dog is always with the tail over his back.
Why is that, Tom?
Well, all dogs have tail over their back. You see dingoes when they're trotting around?
No.
They never go along with their tail down. They always have their tail over their back.
Really? Oh, okay. Okay. And why has that person got the hair going out like that?
Yeah, they're medicine men and that, you know?
Ah, right.
Witch doctors.
Yeah.
Yep. They're witch doctors. And,
So it's right through the cave.
yeah. Then you got little turkeys out here. And there's the sugar bag again. That's all honey here. Again, this thing is growing.
Oh, yeah.
There's a dog again, see with the tail over his back. Dog. This is a fish Jewfish is locally caught down the river. Then you go down this way. You got
Just get the fish. Yep.
then you got those things there, they're yams.
Just do that again, Thomas.
These here are yams.
Right.
And then right down the end here is the old turtle.
Another turtle.
Most of the things that they put up here, like the yam and that, is what you'll find around here.
All the things they ate.
Everything what they eat is here.
Okay,
Hello,
great.
and this is the Quinkan gallery. Now, what we got here is Numeyook upside down again. We got crop turkeys. Yeah. We got fishes. And we got another crayfish. And we got turtle here. This here, go from there. Right down there, that's the rainbow serpent.
The big long one.
Yep. And he's in every painting, everywhere you go.
Oh, amazing.
He's here again, down here, old faded fella. Along there. Goes right on there. And over here, right here, this thing here, they represent the springs. One down here, one over there. That's water. If you don't see that around, you know there's no water.
That's a symbol for water.
Yep. And if we go along here, that there is a river cherry you get in the river. Raw them fruit on it.
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah. What is it?
River cherry.
Cherry as in a tree?
Yep.
Yep.
And you got fish again. Here's another yam here. And you got dilly bag. Yam, fish out here. They drew over the old rainbow serpent as you see come all the way along here. See here?
Yeah.
Go right up here and it's faded out in there. Up the end here, you got turtle. You got the other side over here.
Yeah? There's more.
Over the other side. What the old people did here, man, they drew the bat up there, but there was only one sort of bat that you didn't eat.
Uh-huh.
There's only one flying fox that you could eat, and he's the real brown hawk. And that's him there, but people came along and they put all stripes in there. Supposed to mangle the mountain when they cut him open, when they let the two birds out, two brothers out.
You want to explain that again, Thomas, just for the camera? Say that?
Sure.
Tell us about the rainbow serpent.
The rainbow serpent is supposed to, when he went traveling, when he crawled up here, he made the rivers and all that.
Yep.
And he ate two young hollers. He swallowed them. When he went up the Blue Mountain up there, way up the Cape, they cut him open. When the wind went in there, he started going off because the wind was making him pain.
Yeah.
And that's when he started thrashing around, all the hills come up, and there's rocks everywhere and all that. So that's the story
That's the story of the land.
of the land.
Yeah, because they were here when they saw it.
That's what they did.
The Aboriginals.
Yep.
Yeah. Amazing.
And another one is a giant dingo. It's over in the old side. And that dingo, they cut him up too. And they threw him around, and that's why you got big mob of small dingoes.
Ah.
But there's only one big devil dingo that ate everybody. And my auntie, when this old fella stole her and took her away from one tribe to the other tribe. So they chased him, and he went into where the dingo cave. Story for dingoes. Took the old lady in there, and no one couldn't find him nothing. The dingo used to go out and kill a wallaby, bring it back, and leave it there at the cave.
Mm.
It's far-fetched.
Yeah.
But that's the story. Welcome to Quinkan Gallery. This is the main gallery. This is why they call it Quinkan. These are the people here. That's the old man. That's his eldest son. That's his wife. And that's the rest of his kids down there. If you're wondering, to me, they're our Mary and Joseph. I can't explain it any further.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.